So today, I'm sure everyone has seen the exciting news. We're going to do something on Purim. I couldn't resist because I found this fat notebook all filled with fantastic notes on Purim. And I thought, what could be more fun than sharing them with my dear friends here Sunday, whatever time zone you find yourself in. Okay, so this class is based on a sikha that the Rebbe gave Purim 1967, which answers a lot of questions that we're going to start with. I'm sure we can all remember what we were doing Purim 1967. Actually, I don't think anyone mentioned to me when it was Purim that year. I was a junior at Cornell at the time. It was before Chabad came to Ithaca. All right, but let's be in the here and the moment, the here and now. Okay, I'm going to start with a joke. This was a joke that Y.Y. Jacobson told before teaching this sikha. I always like to, I don't want to take responsibility for the jokes. Okay, so it's an anecdote. The introduction really to what we're going to be learning is an anecdote about Stalin, Yamak Shemo, and Beria. That's what everyone knows who Stalin, Yamak Shemo was. And Beria was the head of the KGB during the time of Stalin. Okay, so Joseph Stalin, Yamak Shemo, phones Beria, the head of the KGB, who, by the way, was executed after Stalin by the Soviets. But at this point, Stalin was alive, and Beria was the head of the KGB. So Beria gets a call from his boss, Comrade Stalin, and Stalin says, I just had here a group of peasants from Uzbekistan, and I'm missing my golden revolver. One of them must have taken it. And Beria says, I'm on the case, Comrade Stalin. So an hour later, Stalin calls Beria up and says, never mind, I misplaced it. I found it in a drawer. And Beria says, that's such a pity because they all confessed already. So it's less funny for anyone who's tasted the bitter waters of that time, or even heard about the bitter waters of that time. But okay, but it's an introduction. So, because it's how it's connected with the Megillah, with chapter 1 of the Megillah, is that it's ironic when a tyrant turns democratic, in quotes, and looks like they're consulting the will of the people. And this irony takes place in the opening chapter of Megillah's Esther. Okay, so Achashverosh summons Vashti to come to him. Okay, he summons Vashti to come to him. And this is in the beginning of chapter 1. We know Achashverosh has a 180-day feast, a half a year-long feast for his servants and ministers. And he displays to them his wealth and his glory and his majesty and his glamour. And then the 5th line there says, after the 180 days are over, you would think he'd had enough. But no, the king makes a 7-day feast for everyone living in the capital, in the courtyard of his palace. Okay, and then chapter 1 continues. In the middle of the 7-day feast, the king instructs his ministers to bring Vashti, his wife Vashti, to show off her beauty. And we know what that means because he wasn't so sneeze in how he was planning to show off her beauty. I'm not going to say anything more there. But Tama'an Hamakal Vashti Levo, and Vashti refuses to come. That's chapter 1, line 12. Queen Vashti refuses to come, and the king becomes extremely angry. V'yitzaf hamelech ma'od. So Achashverosh wanted the queen to come in her full glory. Chazal explains what he wanted, and she refused, and Achashverosh got very angry. Next scene, chapter 1, line 13. Vayomer hamelech l'hachamim yodei ha'itim. And the king speaks to his advisors and asks them, now we're chapter 1, line 15, Kadas malasos b'malka Vashti al asher lo asasa es maimer hamelech. What would be the law to do with Queen Vashti who disobeyed, who betrayed the commandment of the king? He asks these ministers. Why did he consult with them? It says, Ki kain devar hamelech lifnei kol yodei das v'din. This was the custom of the king when dealing with legal questions, to discuss it with his advisors, his experts, and then to give the verdict. So there's something strange about this story. A few chapters later, there's a new queen, Esther, and Achashverosh loves her, and he chooses her from everybody. He lowers the taxes because of her. Can you imagine how much he loved her? He lowered the taxes in her honor, and he makes a special feast for her, and he wants to please her. And later we know Achashverosh tells Esther, I'm ready to give you half the kingdom, chetzi hamalchus. So there's something about Esther that overwhelms Achashverosh. So later, Mordechai asks Esther to go into her husband who adores her and plead for her nation after the decree to kill all the Jews. And chapter 4, line 11, Esther says, I haven't been summoned in 30 days. If you go in without being summoned and the king doesn't stretch out his scepter, achadato lahamis, it's the unequivocal penalty of death. So this death penalty for going into the king's chamber without being summoned, you're dealing with a tyrant, an absolute dictator who has no regard for human life. In Esther's case, we can't even say it was a security breach. If she had wanted to kill Achashverosh, she could have done it a while ago, right? Okay, so back to chapter 1. The king told the queen to do something, and Vashti refused. Suddenly he has a question. Achashverosh brings it to the court. What to do with Vashti? So for walking into the chamber without permission, it's immediate death sentence. And for a direct betrayal of the king's command, now Achashverosh has a question. I mean, in ancient kingdoms, Morid b'malchus, rebelling against the king, was a death sentence. This was not a benevolent democracy. So the queen betrays the king publicly, and suddenly the king decides he has to consult what to do. So Rashi says on Vayiktsov Hamelech Ma'od, the king was very angry. Why? Because she sent him insulting notes. You're a fatso. Imagine he's the king and he gets a note from his wife, you're a fatso. You could see how that could be very disturbing. He wasn't used to people just insulting him. He wants her to come dance naked and she's writing back that he's a fatso and other not nice things. And that's why he got angry, Rashi says. So even a bigger question is about the response to the king. So Memuchan, one of his advisors, who the sages say was Haman, answers, Lo al hamelech levado avso Vashti hamalka, ki al kol hasarim vi al kol ha'amim asher b'chol medinos hamelech Achashverosh. Not only the king alone did Vashti transgress against, but on all the princes and on all the people that are in all the kingdoms ruled by Achashverosh. So Memuchan says to Achashverosh, you know why this is a severe situation? Not because of what Vashti did, because the women in the kingdom are going to learn from her. If Vashti doesn't listen to her husband, why should they? So it's not a personal issue, Haman says, between you and Vashti. It's a precedent for the entire empire, and therefore you have to execute her. So the rationale of why she deserves the death penalty is not treason against Achashverosh. It's because other women won't listen to their husbands. And for this, okay. So in the ancient world, tyranny was the name of the game. People had very little rights. Human rights wasn't really, they hadn't invented that term yet, human rights. Okay, so walking into a room is the death penalty. And here, direct rebellion by Vashti against his whims, there's a question. And even the verdict to kill her is not based on what she did, but on how others will interpret it. Okay, so when you analyze chapter 1, when we analyze chapter 1, so Achashverosh is consulting, and there's the verdict, and there were famous Meforshim on Megillus Esther, and they all ask this question. Rashi, whose function is to explain Peshuto Shel Mikra, the simple meaning, the literal interpretation, Rashi doesn't mention anything. That means it's an obvious answer, like why he decides to consult here and not in other things where you get the immediate death penalty. Okay, so now we're back. Purim for Bringa, 1967, Tafshin Chav Zayin, if you want to bring yourself back there to this Fabringa. And the Rebbe addresses this question and brings some chidushim that are very interesting and relevant to us. Okay. So the Rebbe says, if you study well the first chapter of the Megillah, together with Rashi's explanation, it's automatically answered. It says about this party, now listen carefully, Vashti kadas ein ones ki ken yisad hamelech al kol rab beiso lasos kiratzon ish be'ish. The drinking was without any coercion. This was the foundation of what the king told the rulers, the people in charge of his house, that everything should be done according to the will of each person. Karatzon ish ve'ish. No coercion at this party, because this is what the king commanded all those in charge of his home to follow the will of each person. So Rashi says on Hashtia Kadas Ein Ones, the drinking was, had the king ordered, without any coercion. Rashi says, why would the drinking be with coercion? Of course, quote from Rashi, there are parties where all those present are forced to drink from a large cup. And sometimes you can only drink it with difficulty, and there's pressure to finish it. But here at Achashverosh's 7-day party, Ein Ones, no coercion. And Y. Jacobson mentioned here that teenagers can have this pressure. Don't be a nerd, be a man, drink this huge glass of something. It's very hard thing, coercion. So what is Rashi telling us here? What would we think otherwise? Because at some parties, the person throwing the party wants to force everyone to have a good time and see his prosperity. So he wants you to use a big cup. So you might think that a king who wants to show off his glory will force you to drink from a large cup. If not, it's insulting to him. What, you're not enjoying my party, drinking from that teeny little cup? So the chiddush is, here there's no force, ki chen yisod hamelech. Because Rashi says in the word yisad, he instructed, he commanded. It's an unusual word. Yisad is based on yisod, foundation. It could have just said ki chen siva hamelech. This is how the king commanded, but instead the word yisad is used, the foundation. So Rashi says, who's kol rav beso? Who's the heads of his house, the chief baker, the chief butcher, the chief butler? But we're talking about drinking. Why the chief baker and the chief butcher? Rashi says, it says kol rav beso, all who are in charge of the meal. So what we're learning here is ki ken yisad hamelech. This wasn't just a detail. This was a foundation. The fundamental yesod of this meal was different from any other meal of King Achashverosh, okay? No coercion. So there's two types of feasts a king can make. There's for self-glorification, that's one choice, to make an impression. Some people make a simcha, it's a display of who they are, their glory and their wealth. That's what it says about Achashverosh's first 180-day feast. It says, chapter 1, line 4, Beharoso es osher kavod malchuso v'yes yakar teferes gedulaso. It's all for his glory, it says. The 101st feast, the 180-day one, was all for his glory. I don't give small goblets. That party, you had to drink from a big goblet. And then another choice, there's a meal where you want the people to enjoy themselves. So this was the second 7-day feast. Ki chen yesad hamelech. The yesod of the second feast was not for Achashverosh to display his glory, but for people to have pleasure. Lasos kiritzon ish ve'ish, line 8. Individualized, I want you to have a good time, Achashverosh is saying. So with Achashverosh, it could be so that they would like him. He was very paranoid. But we're not here now to discuss Achashverosh's psychological motivations. That might be another class we'll have before Purim. But here Achashverosh is saying people should enjoy it on their terms. So Rashi says the baker and the butcher were also consulted because it was fundamental to the feast. Every detail, whether meat, pastry, or drinks, no one was forced. Everyone should do as they desire. Rashi says, kol echad be'echad. Okay? So the Rebbe, back in this 1967 Fabringen, says, if this is the case, just from reading the Pesukim and Rashi, now the story with Vashti becomes clear. The basis of the meal was kiritzon ish ve'ish, as each person wanted. The king wanted everyone to do what they wanted, to express themselves, ein ones. The king made this the basis of the meal. So the king tells Vashti to come, and Vashti says, I don't want to. Lasos kiritzon ish ve'ish, Vashti said. This is a party where there's no coercion. So maybe it's the will of the king. Maybe if I don't want to come, if I would come, the king would like it, but it's not morid b'malchutz. It's not rebelling against the king. It's not a regular party of Achashverosh. It's a unique moment of grace here. So this was the question. This is why, so Achashverosh summoned his big experts, the Chachmei Chelm of Persia, and asks, tell me what the case is here. It was a legal pilpul. He had a legal pilpul here. So you could say there's like a few choices of what could be said. One is you could say summoning Vashti is not part of the meal. Only the meal was kiritzon ish ve'ish. Summoning Vashti is an independent command. That's one thing you could say that the advisors could have said to Achashverosh. Or second choice, you could say if the king commands you explicitly to do something, and you don't do it, it's treason. Kiritzon ish ve'ish was for the nation, but here it's his own wife. She's not included in the kiritzon ish ve'ish. Or you could say it's the whole meal, ein ones, and Vashti is one of the people. So the fact that she didn't come, that's okay. That's what advisors could say. So, and also you might, so it's Haman, disguised as his other name, Mumuchan, that says that Vashti has to be killed. So you might ask, this is an aside, what did Haman have against Vashti? And so there's three things the sages say, and it's very interesting. How I first heard these three things was when there was the underground movement in Leningrad of Jewish people coming back to their Jewish identity, they knew about Purim, and they had a copy of the Megillah with a translation into Russian. They didn't have any commentaries whatsoever. That's all they had. And they had this piece of information that the custom is to make a Purim party, a Purim spiel, a Purim play. So they decided they're going to make a play. And in their play, they were able to, just because they were so close to Hashem, they were able to incorporate a lot of midrashim, which just arose in their mind. So one of the things, which I learned from a friend from Leningrad, why did Haman hate Vashti? 3 reasons. One was everyone was invited to Vashti's party except for Geveret Haman, except for Haman's wife. And that could be very sensitive, everyone being invited, being the only one not invited to the party. That's tough. That's one. And the second reason that Haman hated Vashti was that Haman had a daughter, and he had this thought, maybe if he gets rid of Vashti, Achashverosh will marry his daughter. And the third reason was every time Vashti saw Haman, she took off her shoe and hit him on the head. And you could see that could be very upsetting when you're just walking around the palace and you run into Vashti like that. Okay, so that's just an aside, why Haman was trying to get rid of Vashti. All right, so Achashverosh consults his advisors. And some said you can't blame her for Marid V'Malchus for rebelling against the king because you suddenly became a Democrat for 7 days and said no one's going to be forced to do anything. Everybody should do what they want. And Vashti can say, I'm just one of the guys. And Vashti is right, some of the advisors would say. But then the advisor said, we have another problem. We don't want a feminist revolution. All the women will hear the news. The king asked his wife to do something, and she said no. If that husband doesn't have to be listened to, then my husband, certainly not, women might say. So therefore, Vashti must be killed as a lesson to the others. So the Rebbe said, when you learn the Megillah with Rashi, you'll have an answer to the question of why later Esther can't walk into the room without permission. It's Marid V'Malchus. But in chapter 1, there was an exception just for this feast. Okay, so we're going to see how this, hold that in mind, all of those ideas, and we're going to see where we're going to go with them to the interesting psychological and spiritual parts. Okay. So the sages tell us every time it says Hamelech, the king, in Megillus Esther, it's a remez on Hashem. It's hinting at God. The Ramah says in his sefer called Machir Yayin, the price of wine. So the Ramah wrote a commentary on Megillus Esther called The Price of Wine. And he says the name Achashverosh contains 3 words. It's a long name, Achashverosh. It's Acharis Feresha Shalo, the end and the beginning are his. Similar to Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Hashem's name, Haya Hov Evayiyah, he was, he is, and he will be. So Achashverosh means the end and beginning of time are his. Okay, so anytime it says Hamelech, it's speaking about Hashem. Therefore, you can read the Megillah on at least 2 levels, like everything else in Tanakh. There's A, a gripping story, and there's B, a metaphysical level, a metaphor for spiritual dynamics, Hashem's relationship to his people. That's us. Okay. So in Shir Hashirim, even the Peshat, Rashi himself explains it as a mashal. The passion between a groom and a bride is speaking about the relationship of Hashem and the Jewish people. The Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, the son of the Baal HaTanya, the first time he was away from his father on Purim, the first time he heard the Megillah not being read by his father, the Alter Rebbe, so this is what happened. So it's a minhag after the Megillah reading, people put money in a pushka for the Baal Korah, for the person who reads it, like a tip. So the Mittler Rebbe put in a large sum and said, Azah Sheina Maisa Galeint. He read such a beautiful story. And his friend was surprised. Who doesn't know the Purim story? You hear this story every year. And then Mittler Rebbe said, as the Tata Laint is an Andaramai. So when my father reads the story, it's a different story. It's a higher story. When his father reads it, it's all about what's happening in the higher worlds. Now he heard it as a story. So the Melech in Megillus Esther is a remez for Hashem. Now we'll see how this story and these details are relevant to the story of Purim on a spiritual level. Okay, so we know it says, Hashtia Kadas Ein Ones. The drinking was without coercion. The king established and commanded that at this meal, every person's desire is followed. Ki ken Yasad HaMelech. So Hashem, the Melech, made a rule. This meal is karatzon ish v'ish. This person is for everyone. It's like every person's desire. And this approach gives us a deeper interpretation of what actually happened on Purim. The Rebbe is going to explain. Okay. Tadam, tadam, l'chaim. The Gemara, Masechta Shabbos, page 88, says during Matan Torah, it says in Parshas Yisro, the Jewish people stood Tachtis hahar, under the mountain. It should have said near the mountain, but Hashem took the mountain, ta-dum, and places it over their heads like a barrel and says, if you accept the Torah, good. If not, I'll drop this mountain on you. And this will be your burial place. And Rava, the great sage Rava, says, from here we have a justification for the Jews disobeying Torah because we were forced into the relationship. Hashem forced us. He held a mountain over our heads. It's like a groom saying to his prospective bride, after placing her under an elevator, I love you. If you marry me, good. If you say no, the elevator is coming down. That's coercion. So Rava says the Jews can say to Hashem, you forced us. It wasn't voluntary. And the Gemara says the excuse, it was forced, is only good until Purim. The excuse it was forced on us was good until Purim. Because during the time of Achashverosh, we, the Jewish people, accepted the Torah voluntarily, as it says in chapter 9 of the Megillah, V'kibel ha-Yehudim es asher hachelu la'asos. The Jews confirmed what they had begun. The Gemara says what they once accepted with coercion, they now entered into with their own volition and with enthusiasm. Okay, so Purim was many years from Matan Torah. Let's figure it out. We spent 40 years in the Midbar. Then we were 850 years, so 40 years in the desert, 850 years in the land of Israel. Now 70 years we've been in Babel, so that's 960 years after Matan Torah. So the story of Purim, that might be on the quiz, is 960 years, close to 1,000 years after Matan Torah. So for 1,000 years, the sage Rava says, we had the right to rebel. So all the stories that happened during the first Beis Hamikdash, the Avodah Zorah, etc., we had been forced. We were never committed. So this is a limud schus on the Jewish people. For 1,000 years, nothing that we did wrong can actually be charged against us because we were forced into the relationship. But what was Hashem thinking? Who puts an elevator over the Kala's head? Why did Hashem do this? The question becomes even stronger. Tosafos asks in the Gemara, why did Hashem put a mountain over their head? This was Vav Sivan. This was the 6th of Sivan. This was Shavuos. But already on the 5th of Sivan, we said, Naseh B'nishma. We said, we're going to, whatever you tell us, we're going to do. We'll hear and we'll do it. So the question is stronger. The groom proposes to the Kala. The Kala says yes. The next day he puts an elevator over her head, but she already said yes. So these are big questions. Many of the commentaries have answered, and we're going to see a geschmack answer here. Okay, so it's known in the Torah. So if a man coerces an unmarried woman to have relations, the word is ma'anes, mem, aleph, nun, samek, like ones is force. So ma'anes is someone who forces someone. So man coerces an unmarried woman to have relations. If she wants, she can demand that he can't leave her. She could demand if she wants that he marries her and he can't leave her. So Hashem knew there may be a lot of issues between him and the Jewish people, right? There's a lot of issues we have with Hashem. By forcing us into a relationship, kiviyachol, he can't divorce us without our permission, right? That's one of the laws from the guy from the Light of the Exile, Rabbeinu Gershom, Light of the Exile, that a man can't divorce his wife without her permission, and he can't take a second wife without her permission. Or he can't take an Ashkenazim can't take a second wife at all. So what's the inyan here? For 960 years, it was forced on us. By Purim, us, the Jewish people, we suddenly accepted the Torah. What happened on Purim? We said we're going in voluntarily, like Esther went in voluntarily to Achashverosh for the first time when she went to ask to come to the story of the beginning of the salvation of the Jewish people. Okay, so Achashverosh explains the Peshat, the Alter Rebbe explains the Peshat in Torah Or. Hashem is holding a mountain over their head is a mashal. Hashem forced us into the relationship. What does this mean? Now listen carefully. This is very important. What the Alter Rebbe said, it means that Hashem forced us into the relationship. There was such a revelation from above of godliness and unity. Hashem revealed his full love to the Jewish people, and we couldn't resist. He revealed his full love for us became revealed. And we couldn't resist. So that's how we were forced. By the revelations of godliness were so intense, were so great. Who could say no at that point? If someone shows you endless love and does every favor for you, Kamayim hapanim lapanim, like water reflects the face. So Hashem is he just showed us, just before Matan Torah, he just showed us this endless love, and we couldn't resist. We were forced into it. So the Jews didn't have a choice. We had to love him. We saw the opposite of a relationship with Hashem was death, and we chose life. So when Rava says we were forced, it was more sophisticated. We were swept in with love. So by Purim, Hashem was completely concealed. We know that the Megillah Esther is the only one of the 24 books of the Torah where Hashem's name is not mentioned. God's name is not mentioned even once. So Hashem is completely concealed, and we chose him then because we realized this is the truth, and that's the Gavaldic Chiddush of Purim. It says in chapter 9, line 27, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. That what did we do? We accepted, the Jews confirmed and irrevocably accepted upon ourselves. This is what we did at Purim. We accepted the Torah. So Purim, there's a lot of concealment. The name Esther means concealment. In the Gemara Chulin, they asked the question, Esther min haTorah minayin. Where do we find Esther in Chumash? There has to be a hint in the 5 books, because Megillah Esther came later while we were in exile in Bavel. So where is Esther in Chumash? And the answer is Anochi hastir astir es panai bayom hahu. Hashem says, and I will hide my face on this day. Es astir, double that lashon of Esther's name. Hastir astir. So Hashem was concealed, and while Hashem was concealed, we chose him, which is a very interesting idea for ourselves in our life. Because there's times in our life where it seems like God is concealed. We don't see God. And to choose him at that time when he's concealed it's a very exciting commitment. Yes? Okay, so Hashem was concealed and we chose him. And this is the story of this feast. The Melech makes a feast for the people in Shushan. Shushan comes from the word Shoshana, the rose, hinting at Am Kravo, the people. We're known as, it says, we say it in the last Tehillims from Ashrei to the end. It's part of the davening every day. The Jewish people are called Am Kravo. It's also said that line while the Torah is being put back in the arm. So we're the people that are close relatives. We're Hashem's close relatives. So the people living in the capital of the king, he invites them to his meal. What's Hashem's meal? Torah. We know Ein Mayim Ela Torah. There's no water except for Torah. Yayin, wine is Torah. So this is the feast of the Jewish people. But Hashem says, Ein Ones. Ein Ones Kiritzon Ish Ve'ish. You have to choose. We have to choose. I'm not going to force you to drink it. It's up to you. This is Bechira. So this is getting to an exciting point here. It's not forced on us. That's the major advantage of becoming a Baal Tshuva. We're picking it. It's not being forced on us. It's not experience of it being forcing us. We're being forced on us. We're choosing it. So the opening of the Megillah, which doesn't seem connected to the whole story of Haman and Esther and Mordecai, like what's going on in this opening chapter? This is the prelude. Here the Rebbe says is where we have the essence of Purim. So the prelude is Achashverosh summoned Vashti and she said no. Ein ones, I'm not going to reveal so much. So she says, Ein ones, I'm not going to reveal so much that you'll be forced. It's your choice. This is the Chiddush of Purim. Kimu meishakiblu kvar, that we establish what we had already accepted. So this idea that Hashem is saying, I'm not going to reveal myself to you. Hashem's name isn't in the Megillah. We're not being forced. We're choosing it. We're choosing to have a relationship with Hashem. This is the Chiddush of Purim. Because till now, it was, you could say it was forced. Okay, it was forced because he showed his great love for us, but it was forced. But it has to be our choice. Being frum has to be our choice. We have to choose it, right? Right, so this is the Chiddush of Purim. And that's why the Simcha of Purim is greater than the Simcha of Matan Torah, greater than the Simcha of Shavuos. Because on Shavuos, there's no mitzvah of Simcha. On Purim, a person must become drunk on Purim until lo yada, ada le yada, until he doesn't know. And Rashi says it has to be with wine, because the Purim miracle happened during Mishteh Hayayin, during a feast of wine. It begins with Achashverosh's feast, and Achashverosh gave wine during his feast. Yayin Malchus Rav Kayad Hamelech. Great amounts of wine according to the hand of the king. So Purim, wine is in abundance. So instead of spending money, I guess, on expensive scotch, buy expensive wine. It's supposed to be a wine party. On Purim, wine is transformed into something holy, because it's the Mishteh Hayayin, the whole miracle is taking place around wine. Since a simcha beyond finiteness, to the point that when all the other Yom Tovim will be nullified, when Mashiach comes, we'll still have Purim. Did you get that? All the other Yom Tovim, what does that mean? Let's explain. What does nullified mean? When you're lighting a candle, when the sun is out, you're outside and you're lighting a candle outside, you don't notice its light. So there's so much simcha of Mashiach that you don't notice the simcha of every yontif, but still the simcha of Purim will not be nullified. It says so in the Megillah. So that's very exciting, because this is when we chose Hashem, when Hashem is concealed. So what is the great joy of Purim? Until Purim, it was all esarusa de la'ela. It was all an arousal from above. Hashem revealed so much. We couldn't say no, we were forced. The time of Purim was a time of concealment, to the extent that Hashem's name isn't mentioned. And we chose Hashem, and Hashem became ours. Hashem became internalized. And when we internalize something, it's not subject to change. But when the relationship is based on a person's own initiative from below, then it's eternal. When the relationship is based on a person's own bechira, a person's own choice, it's coming from us. We're not being forced. It's an eternal connection. So the same wine that Achashverosh offered in abundance without force is now converted by the Jewish people, and we use our power of choice to develop an infinite and eternal relationship with Hashem. So we use our power, our bechira, we're choosing Hashem. This is what Purim is. So everyone should make some time on Purim to choose Hashem, and we're choosing to develop an infinite and eternal relationship with Hashem. This is the day to do it. So the simcha of Purim will last for eternity. Even after the coming of Mashiach, we'll still separate us. So that should lead us all to having a wonderful day. So I think we're going to do a few more classes on Purim before Purim, because this is so exciting. I'm enjoying. I hope you're all enjoying it. And let's take that get well picture for a Yitzhak Fivish ben Brina Malka, that he should have a refuah shalema and go from strength to strength and be able to keep on teaching us wonderful new things. So if a few more people could put on your cameras for that get well picture. Come on, let's see the beautiful faces. Oh, this is the best part. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Look at these great people. Okay, get ready. We're going to say 1, 2. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Yes, wonderful. So thank you all so much. There's going to be, it's really wonderful. I just really enjoy so much seeing everybody and learning together. This is very special. It makes it much more exciting and interesting doing it this way. And I still have this notebook to go. So we're going to have a few more classes on Purim before Purim, and then we'll get back to our regular studies of finishing off Twinkle and starting the new book on the 6 constant mitzvahs. So there's a lot to look forward to. Everyone should be well and strong and healthy and have good news and a good week. Mwah. Lots of love. There's another class in 2 minutes with Rabbi Ellie. He'll be coming on soon. And thank you really all for coming. Oh, there's a chat. Let's look at the chat to see if there's anything important we need to know. Oh, just a little fan mail. Thank you for the fan mail. See you all next week, Amir Hashem. Kol Tov. Lots of love. Bye, bye, bye.